It's ripping my heart out, thinking of you, wondering how you grew so strong. I'm tearing your heart out, thinking of me, living so thoughtlessly, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. My life out of balance, survival my call, never questioning what I'm turning into, fitting in this culture, my constant goal, all the lives I undo, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. You're slipping away now, out of my grasp. I've no idea how or what I've done. I can't live without you, baby. Hubris aside, I can't breathe without you, honey. There's nowhere to hide, and soon I'll find I can't run. Doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong, doing you wrong. You're slipping away now, out of my grasp. I've no idea how or what I've done. I can't live without you, baby. Hubris aside, I can't breathe without you, honey. There's nowhere to hide, and soon I'll find I can't run.
Thanks especially to new members since we last did one of these live stream events. Those new members include Greg Alter, Brent Montgomery, Joanne Vanek, Mimi Gurman, Orkun Irgun, I'm pretty sure I mispronounced that, sorry, and Gordon Russell. So thanks everybody for joining in. And already David has a question. Wow, not even done with the acknowledgments. So everyone, what is your most telltale sign of NTHE? Asks David. And I'm just going to put that on hold for a while. Again, thanks to the new members. Again, thanks to everybody who's joining today. I wanted to talk briefly about the information that I provided with the last science update from last Wednesday. And there were 3 papers of note. first of them, Inside Climate News. And the headline from Inside Climate News from January 13th, 2021 reads, More overheated forests may soon release more Sorry, let me back that up. That would be many overheated forests may soon release more carbon than they absorb. The subhead, New research suggests that, sooner than expected, trees may become carbon sources rather than carbon sinks, as a feedback loop of rising temperatures drives them to release more greenhouse gases. And the article goes on to correctly point out sudden die-offs of trees, insect outbreaks that are killing trees around the world, and in many places forests are not growing back. This article indicates that new research shows that Earth's overheated climate will alter forests at a global scale even more fundamentally by tipping a critical greenhouse gas switch in the next few decades. The study suggests that by 2040, forests will only take up half as much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as they do now. And most of that is reasonably stated, decent information, except for the decades in the distance time frame, of course, with which I generally take issue. And the article ends, or nearly ends, with the findings challenge the possibility of limiting warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that train left the station a long time ago. What with the aerosol dimming that's going on, or aerosol masking or global dimming that's happening already, and the self-reinforcing feedback loops that have already been triggered. The paper on which the Inside Climate News paper relies, it was published in Science Advances. It's by Catherine Duffy and colleagues. And it's titled, How Close Are We to the Temperature Tipping Point of the Terrestrial Biosphere? Has some good stuff as well. We observe no evidence of acclimation in photosynthesis. That refers to the inability of plants to photosynthesize in light of increased levels of carbon dioxide, which has been a critical point for the deniers of the importance of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for quite a long time. They claim that more carbon dioxide is exactly what plants need. After all, that's what we do in greenhouses, is increase the carbon dioxide content, and thereby reducing the barrier at the stomates, at the leaf level, to carbon dioxide getting into the plant. So more carbon dioxide must be better. And that's true, as I pointed out in my classes 30 years ago, with a mild exception. That's true if we're only increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But, as it turns out, we're increasing temperature at the global level and at the regional level as well. So increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere in the absence of other changes would undoubtedly increase plant growth. But there are other changes that are going on at the same time. The paper goes on, it is unlikely that acclimation will proceed with sufficient speed to compensate for temperature-induced declines. So the temperature-induced declines, again, refer to photosynthesis, and they are indicating that acclimation to the higher temperatures that's not going to keep up with the rapid rate of increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In contrast, here's what the paper reads. In contrast to any CO2 fertilization effect, anticipated higher temperatures associated with elevated CO2 could degrade land carbon uptake, and that failure to account for this results in a gross overestimation of climate change mitigation provided by terrestrial vegetation. Again, exactly right. Again, the kind of information I was teaching in my courses in 1990 and beyond, so for 30 years. The temperature tipping point of the terrestrial biosphere lies not at the end of the century or beyond, but within the next 20 or 30 years. This is the part that I take issue with, And that is what takes us to my climate change summary and update, last updated August 2nd, 2016. And let's look specifically at self-reinforcing feedback loop number 22. And here I point out that not a single paper mentioned in that first paragraph was cited by this paper in Science Advances. The entire first paragraph deals with drought-induced mortality of trees and contributing to increased decomposition of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and decreased sequestration of atmospheric carbon dioxide, what they referred to as adaptation, or in the Science Advances paper. So there's no adaptation going on. I go on to write, such mortality has been documented throughout the world since at least November 2000 in Nature, with recent summaries in the February 2013 issue of Nature for the Tropics, August 2013 issue of Frontiers in Plant Science for Temperate North America, and August 21st, 2015 issue of Science for Boreal Forests. None of these papers were cited in this recent paper in Science Advances. Ditto for everything that follows in the following paragraph on self-reinforcing feedback loop number 22. In the Amazon drought in 2010 led to the release of more carbon than the United States that year. This, according to a paper in Science from February 2011, not cited in the Science Advances paper. And again, the report from Geophysical Research Letters in July of 2013, not mentioned in this paper in Science Advances. An overview focused on the Amazon was provided by Climate News Network, March 5th, 2014, not cited. Paper in the March 19th, 2015 issue of Nature, not cited. Paper in the July 1st, 2016 issue of Global Biogeochemical Cycles, not cited. Skip down to the next paragraph. These results come from Nature Communications, and also I point to a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, again, not cited. And the abstract of the paper in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, affectionately called PNAS by scientists who publish there, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, PNAS. The abstract of the paper indicates that, quote, in contrast to existing predictions of either stability or catastrophic biomass loss, the Amazon forest's response to a drying regional climate is likely to be an immediate, graded, heterogeneous transition from high biomass moist forests to transitional dry forests and woody savanna-like states. And I was surprised and a little disappointed to see none of those papers cited because they all seem quite relevant to me. There are more as well, including in a couple of paragraphs down, February 21st, 2016 issue of Global Change Biology and a March 10th, 2016 issue of Nature. None of those papers cited in this recent paper in Science Advances. So, I would argue that we have long passed the tipping point with respect to trees' photosynthesis and respiration, and that as a consequence, this self-reinforcing feedback loop that they talk about as occurring as early as 2040 is already well underway. This is based on research that I stopped doing August 2nd, 2016, so quite a long time ago. And again, it's surprising to me that these climate scientists are not keeping up with the relevant literature, even when that literature is relatively old. 1980 paper from Nature, for example, and maybe a dozen or 15 papers subsequently published that deal with this exact phenomenon. So that's a little surprising and disappointing. Not disappointing that they didn't cite my work. This is not about me. Disappointing that they didn't know about these other papers that are not difficult to find. I managed to do it in my spare time. And these folks are paid a pretty decent wage precisely to find that information and integrate it into their own papers. Great question, Brooklyn Culture Jam. How much negative feedback am I getting these days relative to previous years? It's pretty interesting. I don't think it's gone down. It has changed forms somewhat because I'm no longer on Facebook or Twitter, because I ignore other social media. There doesn't seem to be much coming at me from those versions of the toxic stew. And so that's the good news. I receive plenty of adverse information via email about what a terrible person I am. But I think for the most part that has declined primarily because of the organized defamation campaign that removed me from public service. So now I'm strictly a non-issue. Essentially, nobody hears of me anymore. I haven't been able to submit to an interview to the corporate media since 2017, basically. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. So what that means is there's no real need to attack me anymore because my ability to transmit my message has been destroyed. James, why haven't we all died yet? That's a fine question. I continue to be amazed at the resilience of industrial civilization. I thought that this whole house of cards would have come down long ago. And every time we get through another trading day on Wall Street without significant corrections, we'll say, I'm a little surprised. So, why aren't we dead yet? Because we still have habitat for humans on Earth. And I'm pretty happy about that, by the way. I'm scrolling through the comments looking for questions. So if I get quiet for a while, that's what's going on. Do we know the percentage globally of forests being a carbon emitter? Well, I don't, and that's a great question. I'm surprised nobody has taken on that question because given the satellite data, we have pretty good information on short notice of which forests at a variety of scales are emitting and taking up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So now that you mention it, I'm a little surprised somebody hasn't undertaken that study. That'd be a great study that an undergraduate, reasonably well-skilled in remote sensing, could take on, and it doesn't seem to me like it would be all that difficult. Why did I decide to move back to the USA? And actually, we decided to move back to the USA. And we did so. We moved back to New York because Pauline's baby sister had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, sometimes called blood cancer. And so Pauline felt like her time would be better spent serving her family and dealing with that particular issue than living off-grid in an area with very poor telecommunications infrastructure, such as Belize. So we moved back originally for that purpose. Then we moved to Central Florida to help Pauline's father move here, where Pauline has two siblings, a brother and a sister, and then be able to conduct tests to determine what's going on with him. He clearly had memory issues. And sure enough, just a couple of weeks ago, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And Pauline has gone to dozens of appointments and spent thousands of hours making those appointments, taking her father to those appointments and getting his life straightened out financially and physically so that there is better support for him than can be provided for him when he lives in a 3-story walk-up apartment in Chicago, which is where he came from and had been living for some 25 years. Okay, so that's why we're back in the USA. No representation. Were you officially banned from Facebook and other social apps? No, stunningly I wasn't. In the early days when I was presenting the information I have subsequently become known for, essentially every one of my videos was removed. I would deliver a presentation, somebody would record it for me, they would post it on Facebook, and it would disappear immediately. And so people were constantly, not me because I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but Pauline and a couple of other people who shot video on my behalf would upload that information and then it would immediately be removed. But I have never been banned from Facebook or Twitter or any other social media apps. And I'm a little surprised about that because of the information that I've been presenting. I voluntarily left Facebook and Twitter a few months ago. I don't remember exactly when. And my life has been much more my own since then. And I feel great about leaving those two particular toxic stews. I'm still on LinkedIn, but that's a far more professional format than Facebook or Twitter. So I can share information there. Basically, nobody sees it in contrast to what goes on Facebook and Twitter. But after presenting this information for many years, I feel like I had reached the people who were going to be reached, who were capable of being reached because they were open-minded enough to be receptive to my message. And then the defamation campaign came along in 2017 and pretty much destroyed my ability to continue doing that work. So now I'm trying to live my message to a far greater extent than I was before. What should we expect in this new year? I think more of the same, and I think we escaped the loss of aerosol masking and the resulting impacts because of the time of year the pandemic broke out and also the time of year that the third wave occurred. So for the first and third waves, we were largely in periods of time in the northern hemisphere when biological activity was minimized. So notice the COVID-19 pandemic broke out in winter, and so trees were all dormant. Other plants in the northern hemisphere were dormant. So there was very little impact on plant life and therefore on plant community life, and the response of the ecosystem was quite muted. And then by the time the third wave came along, we were into the fall in the northern hemisphere at the end of last year. So I think we were quite fortunate with respect to the timing. And if we are not so lucky next time around, I think the impacts will be felt far more directly on humans through significant crop reduction, for example. And even more catastrophic loss of trees, as is pointed out by this latest paper in Science Advances. So I think we can expect an acceleration of what we've been seeing so far. Will that lead to a significant loss in grain production so that maybe we peaked in the last year or two and the crop production will decline significantly, and that will cause this set of living arrangements to decay even further? Maybe so. It certainly wouldn't surprise me. Let's see. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. With respect to the next oil shock, the next oil shock certainly could be on its way. And interestingly, I think COVID-19 has again provided another advantage with respect to timing. Demand is way down for oil and gas, for fossil fuels generally, because people are not going anywhere. People are not traveling as much as they were. A lot of people are working from home, so that saves the daily commute. So that has profoundly decreased the demand for oil and gas. So that's been, again, quite fortunate for humans with respect to retention of our habitat. Thank you, Sandra, for joining the Nature Bats Last YouTube channel as a climate defender. Oh, Grateful Dan says, since geoengineering will not fix the planet's oceans dying due to human activity, can you explain, in your opinion, how humans will lose habitat due to dead oceans? Yeah, lack of food. Lack of food for one, loss of phytoplankton for another. And the phytoplankton in the ocean provides approximately 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. Approximately the other 50% comes from terrestrial systems, most notably the Amazon basin. So, two sources of potential loss of habitat for human beings: the loss of food, which is significant, perhaps not for you in particular, but for many people around the world. Think about, it wasn't that long ago, 10,000 years ago, probably 70 or 80% of the people on the planet lived within a few kilometers of the ocean because that's where the food was. There's an enormous amount of food that still comes from the ocean, obviously, and the subsequent decline in food supply as a result of a couple of things I've talked about before: loss of the phytoplankton, base of the marine food web, and also the toxicity of ocean acidification for the organisms. So we're already seeing the shifting baseline with respect to large fish. All the large fish are effectively gone. I'm sure many of you have seen those old pictures of Ernest Hemingway, for example, holding up the marlin that he caught, and the thing's 12 feet long. He's not holding it up. He's standing beside it while it's being held up by a rope or a cable. And you haven't seen one of those pictures lately. I'm not talking about with Ernest Hemingway. I know he's not alive anymore. But you haven't seen many of those 12-foot marlins anymore either. These days, a big fish caught from the ocean is 4 or 5 feet long. A third or half as long as the big fish used to be. So that's very important. What do I think of the president of Brazil being sued by Amazon natives? I had no idea, because I pay so little attention to politics, domestic or foreign. Raza Eco Warrior, I want to point out a slight error there. You say we are 3 meals short of anarchy. We are actually 3 meals short of chaos. Anarchism, chaos is the absence of rules. Anarchism is the absence of rulers. Anarchism, I'm going to quote from Edward Abbey here. Anarchism is not a romantic fable, but the hard-headed realization, based on 5,000 years of experience, that we cannot entrust the management of our lives to kings, priests, politicians, generals, and county commissioners. Anarchists take responsibility for themselves and for their neighbors, human and otherwise. And that's an important distinction from chaos. Greta says, time will tell if Biden administration fulfills promises on climate change. I don't think it'll take very long either. Do I have a citation for the melting down of the 450 nuclear reactors? Do you mean for the fact that they will melt down when humans stop caring about their maintenance and instead go to spend time at home with their families? Or do you mean the resultant stripping away of the atmosphere when that occurs? Because I have references for both of those. The first is the reference of common sense. Even first responders stop responding when a crisis impacts their home life, their family life. When a crisis becomes too big for first responders, they tend to go home to try to protect their own, rather than serving as a public servant. Thank you, James Gilchrist, and welcome to the Nature Bats Last channel as a climate defender. And similarly, thank you, Sandra Rapash. Pretty sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Welcome to the Nature Bats Last channel as a climate defender as well. Oh, can I briefly describe what a 2C and 3C world would look like, respectively? No, I can't. Humans have never occupied a 2C or a 3C world. And what's far more important than the number itself, what's far more important than 2C or 2.5C or 3C or 7C is the rate at which we get there. We are already outstripping the ability of vertebrates to keep up by a factor of 10,000 times, as I pointed out in the peer-reviewed literature many times. Mammals can't keep up either, as I pointed out a few times. So the rate of change is what's critically important, and I suspect what that means is a 2 or a 3C world has few, if any, humans, and the catastrophic meltdown of a whole bunch of nuclear power plants, and the loss of most complex life on Earth, perhaps all, in the very near term, because of the process of co-extinctions pointed out by Strona and Bradshaw in their November 2018 paper in Scientific Reports. David asks for Guy and Pauline both to answer this question. What is your favorite Bernie meme? And I'm an anarchist. I don't follow politics really at all. In fact, that meme of Bernie sitting in a chair with those mittens on was brought to my individual attention by 100 people probably. And that's the only reason I know about that meme. That's the only Bernie meme I've ever seen that I can recall. So that would have to be my favorite because it's my only. Raza Eco Warrior, it's perfectly okay if you eat me if I'm dead in the future. I got no problem with that. I hope to continue to be useful after I'm dead. Edward Abbey said something about among the best things that could happen to the human body was that it be chewed up by wild birds or wild organisms of some kind. And I couldn't agree more with that. Okay, 2 questions from Jimmy John. Has Paul Beckwith ever said anything to me off camera that indicates he may be on the same page as you in regards to near-term human extinction? No, never. You have to bear in mind that he has a lot of privilege to lose between now and then. Also, what are your thoughts on David Wasdell? I haven't really kept track of Wasdell's work. I cited some of his work years ago, but that's all I know about him. I think it was from a report he wrote, maybe a presentation, but I think a report that he wrote. But this goes back many years. And so I don't have much of an opinion. And if he has produced anything recently, I haven't seen it. So I have no good reason to dislike him because I don't know what he's up to. Oh yeah, James Gilchrist, you're very confused about this. Life flourished back in the time of the dinosaurs, and the world was much hotter back then. As the planet gets warmer, life prospers. No, it does not. It did previously, because it took a long time to get there, and it stayed at that temperature for a very long time. It's all about the rate of change. This is something that almost nobody